Tamret and Steve were firing their weapons on him, but he ignored the impacts like they were raindrops. I looked around, trying to find an angle, some way to survive the onslaught of an enraged Ardov, who now appeared to want nothing so much as to avenge himself. Maybe the trick with the die hadn't been as smart as I'd thought it was, but Ardov had reminded me of something fairly important. Up until I'd faced him on Earth, he had always been bigger and stronger and more dangerous than I was, and I'd always found a way to get the upper hand. The only reason he'd gotten the better of me in our last two encounters was because he'd had the advantage of cleverness, even if it was cleverness supplied by phatic scientists. On Earth, he'd had the anti-nanite powder that had shut down my upgrades. On the ship, he'd had the EMP device. Now, he had nothing but pure power and rage, and that meant, historically speaking, the odds did favor me. Even so, with him running towards me at almost 100 miles an hour, I didn't feel like the stats told the whole story. "Scatter!" I shouted to the others. "Take cover!" He might try to hurt them in order to throw me off, so if they were in different locations, it would make it harder for him. I leapt forward, planning to take him out at the knees. I could hit him with the force of a freight train and it probably wouldn't break anything. If it did, the injuries would heal almost instantly, but physics still affected us, and he would be knocked over, buying me a few seconds to work out a broader strategy. In our heightened states, seconds could seem like hours. The problem was that Ardov, while no genius, wasn't actually stupid. He could project my movements as well as I could project his. More significantly, it had looked like he was coming to tear my head off, but I realized an instant too late he wanted instead to tear out my heart. He was going after Tamret. There was no point in her running. She knew she couldn't outpace him, so she turned and fired the gun into his face. The blast did nothing, but the light distracted him, just for an instant. It was the only advantage I would get, so I took it. I grabbed him and leapt into the air, moving like a rocket. I smashed his head into the ceiling, which erupted in a burst of dust and wood and metal. He was, I realized, stuck. While he tried to pull himself out without separating his own head from his body, I hovered in the air, slamming his torso with punches that I delivered with lightning speed. This might seem like poor sportsmanship, but the guy had just tried to kill my maybe ex-girlfriend, and I was in no mood to play nice. Ardov managed to wiggle free, and he tumbled to the ground with chunks of ceiling falling after him. Dust clung to the fur on his face. Maybe he hadn't figured out how to fly yet. He had the same abilities I did, but he still had to explore them and discover what they were. I'd had more time to tinker. This was not an advantage I was going to squander. I turned around, and with one fist extended in the classic Superman pose, I sped towards him like a rocket. He leapt out of the way in time to avoid the impact, but I still managed to grab him by the shirt. I spun him rapidly, twirling like a discus thrower, and tossed him across the hangar so he landed hard against the wall. The wall dented, but didn't break. I used the momentary lull to look around. I didn't see any of the others, that was good. If I didn't see them, then Ardov didn't. I was going to scan for life signs, but I held off. Maybe he didn't know how to do it yet either, but he might be able to detect what I was doing. I didn't want to teach him any new tricks, especially now that he seemed to have picked up on flying. I realized this because he was zipping through the air, coming directly towards me. "I'm gonna make you watch me kill them!" he screamed with his face twisted in rage. I waited until the last second and super sped out of the way. Ardov tried to stop, but he ended up colliding with the hull of a shuttle. I knew from my own experiences that the former tech didn't dull the pain of a blow like that, but it made it easier to deal with. Like you could put it in a box and forget about it until later. Pain aside, a blunder like that was humiliating, and I could see Ardov was taking it kind of hard. "That was fun," I said. "Let's do that a couple more times before your bad die roll kills you." He howled and came at me again. This time I went low, under his reach, and rolled like a ball into his legs. He toppled like a bowling pin. I grabbed his ankle, leapt into the air, and spun until we must have looked like a propeller. I let him go, and he crashed into the wall again. This time he did go through it. "I could do this all day," I shouted. "Up until you're dead, I mean. Tossing your corpse around won't be as much fun." By the time I finished speaking, he was back, and almost on top of me, moving through the air like a missile. I tried dodging left, but he anticipated me this time, and he pulled me up by the arm. Even with the tech repairing damage almost the instant it was inflicted, the pain was incredible. It shot up my arm and through my whole body. I hardly had time to call out because he tossed me against the wall. I hit with a solid impact, and everything went white and hot for an instant before the nanites dulled the pain and restored the damaged tissue. No serious harm done, but it was a lot more fun being on the other side of the toss. Ardov was on me again, lifting me up and hurling me back into the center of the hangar. I landed with a heavy thud, and I had hardly lifted my head off the floor when he came at me, punching me in the face. My head knocked against the hard floor and bounced up again, back into his fist, and he hit me again. This was bad. The punches were coming fast. Too fast for the fraction of a second my nanites needed to compensate for injury and pain. It was like in a video game where you corner an enemy into a wedge of the landscape, and you keep hitting or shooting them each time it tries to make a move. I was in a feedback loop, and I couldn't get out. "If I'm going to die, you're going to die first," he shouted as he punched me. My head kept hitting the floor. It felt like my face was turning into hot mash. My arms and legs twitched, and I couldn't control them. Everything started to recede. Maybe I was losing consciousness. Maybe the nanites were tinkering with my brain so the pain wouldn't make me black out. But the world felt like it was floating away. It was almost like falling asleep, but with a lot more face pummeling. This was really it. Ardov was going to kill me. And even if one of the others had been willing to use the powder to save the Confederation from the Fads, they would never be able to because I hadn't told them about it. In losing to Ardov, I had just lost the war. I needed to find a way to turn this around, but I couldn't. It was like my body didn't belong to me anymore. I was this passive thing that watched through a red haze as Ardov's furry fist cocked back and came at me again and again. It was an endless, repetitive motion, like a mechanical piston firing away, destroying me. And it continued until something big and metal hit Ardov in the side and he went flying off me. I looked up to see a shuttle now parked inches from where I lay. Steve had to be piloting it. He'd hit Ardov with a shuttle. Arms were grabbing me. I couldn't see who it was. My vision was too foggy. But the arms weren't hitting me, so I was going to assume they were friendly. I was set down somewhere, and there was a vague sensation of movement. I heard gasping. It was Alice, maybe. And from somewhere far away, I heard Tamret telling someone to shut up. And then I passed out. When I came to, my HUD's chronometer informed me I had been unconscious for 87 seconds so my body could perform some necessary maintenance. That felt like an understatement. The nanites had put those 87 seconds to good use, though, because I could see now, and it seemed like we were on a small, phatic ship, probably another long-range shuttle. I did not feel great by any reasonable standard, but I was feeling a lot better than when Ardov had been beating me into oblivion. "Hey," I heard my son say. His face grew back. "It is an improvement over the Pope," said Charles, turning around from his position at the navigation console, "if not a major one." Tamret was hugging me. "You looked awful. You looked like you shouldn't even have been alive." "I felt like that," I said, trying not to think about the fact that Tamret seemed to no longer be angry with me. "But I'm okay now. Where are we?"
"There are orbital patrols," Steve said from the helm station. "So I'm flying in atmosphere until Charles can calculate a safe path. Once he figures out a blind spot, we're going to make a run for it."
Tamret was still hugging me, and I wasn't complaining. I had almost died out there. I had almost lost everything, and I would have if these guys hadn't saved me. Steve had hit a bad guy with a space bus. That seemed like the height of friendship. Then an alarm went off.
"We are experiencing hull degradation," Charles said.
"What could be causing that?"
Alice asked.
"I have no idea," Charles said. "I'm putting it on the monitor."
I'm not really all that good with technical stuff, but I could see the problem at once. Ardov was on top of the shuttle, holding a drill of some kind, trying to burn his way through the hull.
"We have perhaps 7 minutes until he breaches," Charles explained, "but only 90 seconds until he does enough damage to make the ship unsafe for space travel."
I pushed myself to my feet. I felt a little lightheaded, but almost as soon as I put a hand to the bulkhead to steady myself, I started feeling better. Now that I was no longer being beaten mercilessly, I was getting stronger by the second. "I'm going out there. I'll get rid of him." I may not have been at maximum capacity yet, but I was close, and someone had to stop Ardov.
"Relax, mate,"
Steve said casually, as though having a guy on your hull with a drill was no big deal.
"You don't need to do everything. Just sit down, and everyone buckle up."
We did as he said, and as soon as we were ready, Steve simply rotated the shuttle. Ardov looked up, startled. He made a sudden effort to hold on, but he didn't react quick enough and simply fell off like a bean tipped out of a can. He fell towards the sea, still holding the drill. We watched in fascination and horror as he plummeted, limbs flailing. Why wasn't he flying? Had I hurt him too much in our fight? Was he too disoriented? Too distracted by his belief that I had doomed him with a bad saving throw? I kept expecting him to hold himself in the air and zip back towards us. But he didn't. He fell. I wanted to turn away. I didn't want to see the impact, and yet I couldn't stop watching. I saw that, in the last instant, he seemed to stop struggling and relaxed, as though accepting his fate. Then there was a sudden gust of sea spray as a giant eel exploded from the surface, its great jaws open. It let Ardov land softly against its massive yellow tongue, with barely a bounce, like he landed on a pillow. The eel then snapped its mouth shut and disappeared beneath the waves. We all remained silent for a moment.
"I am attempting to think how this might qualify as poetic justice," Charles said quietly, "but I can come up with nothing." "No poetry required," Steve said. "He was a bad bloke, and now he's eel food. Sometimes literal is best."
No one said anything. There was nothing left to say. I'd wanted Ardov out of our way, but not dead. Not that I questioned what Steve had done. He'd saved the ship, which meant he saved us. Maybe in doing so, he'd saved the Confederation. I supposed Colonel Rage would say, this was war, and in war you have to do terrible things in order to stop worse things. Ardov had put us in the position of having to drop him into the ocean, but I knew this would haunt me later. I just hoped that there would be a later in which to be haunted. A moment later, Charles quietly told us he had calculated our escape vector. We departed Planet Pleasant and tunneled towards the prison facility, where we would finally rescue Gliwick and, I hoped, put everything right.